Well, happy Monday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on MBC Live. We're glad that you're here. And as always, we invite you to come and leave us a comment and put anything there that you would like to let us know what's going on, that you're here and you want to comment on what we're talking about today. And then also I'd remind you, we close out MBC Live with a time of prayer. And so I encourage you to leave a prayer request, and I will make sure that we pray over that as we close out today. Sitting across the table from me is our trusty guru of Facebook, our trusty Facebook guru, Brother Josh.
I didn't earn it that today. So there's always trouble. Facebook, or actually the people that we use to produce the live streams, they had an issue with Facebook. Facebook made a change on them. So last week we had problems. Now I was dealing with some little things, but we're here.
Well, what is so funny? I'm sorry, I got tickled. Brother Josh, if you know him, you know he is not a fan of Facebook.
No,
he's just not a big fan of lots of things regarding Facebook. And so while he has an account, the only reason he uses Facebook is to communicate with youth parents on youth events. He does not post on Facebook because he don't want all the traffic. He don't want all the stuff that comes with being a part of Facebook, which is totally your call. And he lowers himself to do MBC Live. He really just has to come to a place of.
I have to humble myself. It's for the people. Gotta just do it.
Sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. Well, the reason I'm having fun with this is because twice now he tried to go live and it went to his Facebook account instead of the church, and he was like, "No."
It's been like 2 years. Haven't made a post. Now it's happened.
And now it's like Facebook saying, "We're not letting you go.
Yeah,
you're gonna be here. We're not turning you loose." So here we are, Facebook Live. On the church's account.
That's right.
Not on Josh Matthias. Matter of fact, if you go, don't even go look for it because he's hidden it.
I'm going to delete it. It's going to be gone.
He's anonymous. Nobody knows he's here. So again, welcome to MVC Live. And I want to encourage you that if you have a prayer request, please drop it in the comments and we'll pray over that. I wanted to discuss just a couple of things this afternoon, Brother Josh, as we have come to the end of the book of James. James has said several times about how we ought to pray for each other, really describes how our conduct should be in the community of faith among brothers and sisters in Christ, that we should pray for each other. He really condemns judging each other in the sense of being critical because of what's happened in somebody's life and judging that to be whether spiritual or unspiritual, and even if somebody's in a sin, he didn't call us to criticize, but he called us to pray for each other, to help each other. And so even yesterday, as we were concluding the book of James, the last two verses, the last thing James says for all of time and eternity that's been written down that we know of, is that if one of you from among you wanders from the truth and somebody within the body goes after them, that you're turning them away from the error of their ways and potentially saving their soul from death and covering over a multitude of sins. So that really is where he led us, because all through the book of James, he talked about the fact that that's how we ought to treat one another. That's how we ought to care for each other. And I was thinking of a verse this morning because Paul describes a lot of these things that James wrote about in the book of Galatians. As a matter of fact, I was telling Brother Josh that I contemplated, because we finished James yesterday, praying about where the Lord would have me to go next Sunday, whether to start another book or if he has something specific he wants to say. Just kind of praying about that. But Galatians chapter 6, verse 1 says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." So be careful is what he's saying. But then verse 2, he said, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." So verse 1, he describes something that James talked about.
Yeah.
That if somebody has wandered away from the truth, that those of you who are spiritual, and really Paul gets a little, if they're overtaken in a trespass. So James says if they're wanting away from the truth, which is essentially the same thing, but
Right.
Paul says it a little stronger.
Right.
They're in sin. They're living a lifestyle of sin now. They've wandered into sin. That those who are spiritual should go to restore them. Now, there's one verse. The NIV uses a different verse, or a different word rather. New King James says in the spirit of gentleness. The NIV says gently, which is a great way to put that if we're gonna let God use us to go try to help a brother and sister who's wandered away from the truth, fallen into sin, that we do so gently.
Yeah.
I think even before we talk about, because what I wanted to discuss today was the fulfilling the law of Christ and bearing one another's burdens, but we're just reminded that we, even when God has us help somebody, we remember that it could very well be us.
Yeah.
We are all just as capable
Right.
to be in that position as whomever it is we may be there to help.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, he warns us to do so gently. In other words, don't go there with a haughty attitude of, what kind of fool are you?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's understanding there's circumstances that people can go through. So it's that gentleness, that attitude, I think, respects the potential seriousness of the issue and not just attacking them over it. So,
Mm-hmm. And also reminding ourselves that it could be us.
yeah.
And if this is us, how do we want somebody coming to help us?
Right.
And how would they be received? But then he said that we are to bear one another's burdens, and so to fulfill the law of Christ. And the thought running through my mind was, how do we fulfill the law of Christ? By bearing one another's burdens. Now, I want to talk in a minute about what it is to bear somebody else's burdens.
Right.
But almost the motivation behind doing so is that we're fulfilling the law of Christ. So what does that mean? How do we fulfill the law of Christ by bearing each other's burdens?
Yeah. I mean, I think I immediately go back to what is the passage where I thought I wrote it down. Is it Mark 12 where they question Jesus asking what's the most important law, and he says love God, love people. And so whenever we look in the Bible, we don't see a specific place like this is the law of Christ. And so for me, I think it goes back to this idea. That's what I kind of tell the youth, like this is very simple in the New Testament. We're called to love God, love people. And I think it's going back to the Old Testament, looking at the Old Testament law and seeing how all of the Old Testament laws fall under those two categories. It's either related to God or related to people. And specifically, it's loving each of those categories. And so I think when it comes to bearing burdens and specifically fulfilling the law of Christ, I think we have to begin at that point of asking, what's the law of Christ? So,
and Paul actually discusses what you're saying in chapter 5, verse 13, that we've been called to liberty, but don't use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but to serve one another. And then he quotes the original. Now, Jesus quotes really from Leviticus when he quotes it, but it's Leviticus 19:18. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
right.
So Jesus he put in those two categories, love the Lord your God, then to love your neighbor as yourself. Paul is really dealing with a specific point, so he really only quotes the one part of that.
Yeah.
But it's to love your neighbor as yourself, and he's calling us to serve each other.
Right. Yeah, I think too, and I didn't tell you I was going to bring this up, but can you read verse 5
Of chapter 6?
Chapter 6, yeah.
Yeah. For each one shall bear his own load.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like we get done saying bear one another's, right? We're assisting someone else. And then 6:5, 3 verses later, bear his own, right? And I think if you just read that, there's a question of, well, is he contradicting himself? Like, is he bringing something else up? Is he contradicting what he's saying? Personally, I feel like he's going towards, in verse 5, I think he's going towards personal responsibility, right? There's things that I'm responsible for. Like I have my family, I have my church, my job, my own personal, responsibilities spiritually even. Like those things are all on me. And so I think Paul in 6 verse 2 and verse 5, he's talking about different things and not contradicting, but he's saying you need to be mindful of your own personal responsibilities that God has given you, so that we're mindful of those things.
You know, there's two examples that come to mind with what you're saying. I've spent a lot of time counseling with people through the years, and sometimes I've counseled people who have been abused. And there is a mindset change that happens naturally. It's unnatural, but it's natural for people who've been in that kind of situation. And I've told them two things. Number one, could we start with your normal is not normal? That what has been done to you is not normal, and what's created the mindset is not normal. Your normal is not normal. But the one thing I would say to people, and I think this is emphasizing what you're saying and understanding the two points Paul's trying to make, is that I've said to people, I can fight with you, and to help you, but I can't fight for you.
Right.
There's work you have to do if you want to get to a place of thinking beyond the abuse and being healed, reaching a place of healing from this. You have to work at it. I can't do that for you. I can come alongside you. I can pray for you. I can offer tools. I can listen. There's a lot of things I can do, but there's a lot of things I can't do.
Right.
I can't do it for you.
Yeah, and that's that word that you use, that coming alongside. I think that's the key difference between, and that's even what I wrote down. It's 6:2 is saying it comes alongside. And then to me, 6:5 is saying there are things that are simply on you. Like I can't do them for you. I can't, go to my father-in-law and say, take care of your daughter because I'm tired of, like I just want to sit on my butt and do nothing. Like that's like essentially what I think 6:5 goes back to, is this responsibility that we simply have. Like this, that's my wife. I take care of her. I do what's necessary for my kids and for my house and all these things. So I think the idea kind of comes back to the idea like, as Christians, we're coming alongside to support, not necessarily I'm going to take it all on for you. And
I actually think, I totally agree that's what Paul is describing, that for us to take it all on ourselves actually would be a misinterpretation and a misuse of this principle.
Yeah,
it's exactly what he's not saying, is that we do it for them. So one of the pictures that comes to my mind is in the Old Testament when the battle was going on in the valley below, and Moses was up on the mountaintop, and when he raised his hands, they started winning.
Yeah.
But after a while, as you can imagine, his hands started getting weary, and when he'd come down, they started losing. So it was it Aaron and I forget who the other one was. I just read Aaron and Hur, and so I don't know if that was the same two people, but it seems like it was.
Yeah.
But they came alongside him, and he had to raise the hand.
Yeah.
But they held him up, and that's to me one of the pictures that we get from this text. One of my favorite preachers to read after is Dr. Tony Evans. He just has a very unique perspective, and I love to listen to him preach, and I love to read after him. But he said this picture is like weight spotters. Now, it's been a long time since I went to the gym, but I used to lift weights. Because there was a guy in my church that he actually had a home gym, and we would go and lift weights together. And there were times when we're doing the repetitions on the weights, and you get to that last one, and you just almost can't get it up because your muscles are sitting quivering. And that's what the spotter does, is not to do it for you. Otherwise, what's the benefit?
Yeah.
If he's doing it up, you just no benefit. But it is when you get to that point where you just can't get it up, he comes along and lifts it up with you, to set it down. And he said that's the picture that that he's painting here. That's the bearing of one another's burdens, to serve each other, but to come alongside them. And thus it fulfills the Lord Jesus telling us to love the Lord our God and to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
And being part of each other's lives. And two things I wanted to point out there is that in Galatians 6:1, he is talking about somebody that's in sin, that has backslid on the Lord. But 6:2, when we talk about bearing one another's burdens, it doesn't necessarily mean it's because of sin.
Yeah.
It can be. That's a part of it. I think it's an example. But it could be many other things in life that we're struggling with, or burdens. Because literally the word burden is just a heavy stone, a heavy
Right.
things been placed around
load.
us.
Yeah.
Heavy
Yeah,
load.
and I think that's kind of what we have to take into account, right? Like there are major things that can occur, like a spouse passes away, a child gets injured, and there's a pastor I follow on Facebook, kind of closer to Houston, and there was an apartment building that burnt down, and their church was out there supporting them. So it can be in any number of things that can go on. It's not easy for us to say like this counts, this doesn't. Like there's just simply some things that just happen in life that we come alongside.
You know, somebody, I wrote something down that I had read. Let me see if I can find it, because I love the way they put it. Where did it go? So one person said, burdens refer to failures, temptations, testing, trials, whatever the load is.
Yeah.
He said, but instead of standing off at a distance and criticizing, we should fly to the side of our brother or sister in trouble or distress and help them in every possible way.
Yeah.
And that really is a great point that I think he is making here, for us to sit back and we judge whether or not they deserve our help.
Yeah.
And you say, well, I don't want to enable them to further. Well, I don't think that's the point.
Right.
You know, part of if somebody's in sin, our help is, hey, come on back.
Right.
Let's get out of this. But I also know there have been times in my life that God has allowed people to help me, and I'm in the situation because of my stupidity, or my ignorance, or my disobedience, whatever the case may be. But that God has allowed somebody to come alongside, and to our family members, not just from the pastor, staff, but all members looking at each other in that way to help each other. And in one other aspect, and then we'll close this. I want to give this point because I was having a discussion with someone the other day and they were being very genuine in their thought process here, and they said, you know, it's very, very difficult. They were referring to Sunday a week ago, the message from James that day, and that it's sometimes difficult